You are listening to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast, a podcast for leaders of today's nonprofits. We focus on the most pressing issues in a modern nonprofit, from grant writing and fundraising to back office administration like accounting. If you are looking for tips and hacks to make your nonprofit more modern and intentional, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Tosha Anderson. I've worked with hundreds of nonprofits over many years in different capacities. First as an auditor, then a CFO of a nonprofit, and now I'm a CPA that owns the Charity CFO, an accounting firm working exclusively with nonprofit organizations. I'm passionate about trying to make the work of nonprofits even easier through the most modern practices I've learned from some of our most successful clients. Keep listening. Hey friends, welcome back. It's been a few weeks since the holiday break, since the winter break, and I'm back and starting to record some new episodes, and I am really excited. I say this like every episode, but I need it this time. I brought along my new friend, Nick Lynch. Nick, you are the co-founder and CEO of a really cool firm called Kaleidoscope, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But we'll talk a little bit more specifically about Kaleidoscope, but just as a little bit of context for folks, why I have you on this episode and what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about digital marketing. We're going to be talking about how to leverage corporations and influencers and social media to further the mission of your organization and to bring awareness to what you're doing. And Nick, a little bit more about your background, I guess, before we dive in. Interestingly, we were talking before I hit the record button, and you shared that you have you started your career, or early on in your career, you spent some time in social media and digital marketing. And then, of course, you have, personal reasons for why you might want to better or further or promote social causes. So you just kind of did this mashup of how do we take these, social causes, these nonprofit or these mission-based businesses, and how do we drive them further into this like digital web space through all of these different avenues of social media or other digital platforms. Is that right, Nick? Anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, I've been from a professional standpoint, have, spent my career of almost 16 some odd years here based in LA, focused on, building solutions for advertisers to better target their audiences on digital and social media. And then the personal tie, though, is I'm a cancer survivor. I'm a Make-A-Wish kid. They sent me to Disneyland when I was 3, and I've been very close with the Make-A-Wish Foundation ever since. And that's really the genesis of Kaleidoscope. My personal and professional life's colliding and, working to build something that I hope creates impact.
Well, and I love meeting people like you, Nick, because I think there's this idea that, there's like the nonprofit world and we just have to scrap by with like whatever we can get with. And, there's this world out there that's modern and innovative and interesting. And, us nonprofits, we just can't compete with what the for-profit world is doing. We just don't have the resources, or we don't know how to get started, or we don't have enough people. And so I always love introducing businesses or firms like yourself that can help leverage all of these tools and make it accessible to nonprofit organizations. And I'm excited to dive into this conversation. But let's talk a little bit more. Let's just kind of start with some of the basics, right? So we talked about influencers, but I think a term that I keep hearing around is this idea of an ambassador. And many people see ambassadors like a spokesperson or somebody that kind of co-brands, or they help promote. Maybe they have a significant voice, whether it's a corporation or whatever. Talk to us about your work in ambassador programs and what you've seen happen with nonprofits and how can they benefit from something like this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's, from a high level perspective, I mean, the word influencer gets thrown around a lot. Some people don't know what an influencer is. I work a lot in the Asia side as well, and they actually call influencers key opinion leaders, which I actually like that term a lot better. Because, in our view, everybody is an influencer. Everybody has influence, whether you're Kim Kardashian with millions and millions of followers, or whether you're Nick Lynch with 200 followers. Or I mean, if the 200 people that I maybe follow me, if I made a book recommendation or I saw Avatar, you got to go see it. People that follow me are probably going to be like, oh, well, Nick saw it. I like when he goes and recommends a movie to me when we talk on the phone or whatever. I'm going to go, see that movie too. So everybody has some level of influence, or somebody, every person is some type of key opinion leader. And so when we think about that through sort of the cause-based organization lens or the nonprofit lens, it's really about how can we find alignment with people who have influence or have an audience that can help us build, sustain, or grow our community. And so that's like for when we think about these types of programs or these opportunities, we really think less about the size of a partner in the influencer space or the key opinion leader space, and really about is it authentic alignment that helps us either enrich our community, grow our community, or build our community. And so that's really where we think of it, and that's where we root everything, because I think that to your point around accessibility, not only from a price perspective, but just like I don't understand it, it's really key for us to bring everything into sort of the two key tenets we always talk about. Are we telling the right story to the right community? And so I think when you look at these types of new programs like that, whether it's digital or not, I think it's a little bit more accessible and a little bit more tangible about how we create these types of programs. Can we tell the right stories using the right community members to grow or to sustain our community? And so that's kind of how we think about ambassador programs.
Gotcha. So Kaleidoscope helps develop these kind of ambassador programs and kind of identify these influencer partnerships, right? I mean, that's one of the things that you do for your clients, or in partnership. That's a part of the scope of work you do, I would imagine. How do you identify these partnerships? I mean, there's a lot of people in this world, and if you're a nonprofit and maybe what you think you do is really impactful, whether it's in your local community or maybe you're doing something that's really not accessible or available throughout the country, and you want to get the word out, how do you find those influencer partnerships, get their attention, convince them, all of the things? I think it's overwhelming. Like, yeah, of course, heck, I'd like to have an influencer partnership, but how can I differentiate myself from any other, I don't know, pick one, domestic violence shelter, for example. And does it make sense for me to do something on a national scale or a local scale, and all of the different variables I'm sure you get with?
For sure. The way that we look about this type of opportunity is really around partnerships as a whole, not only partnerships on the ambassador or the influencer side, but also corporate partners. Corporate partners play a key role, we believe, in all this. And what we try to do is create sort of what we call like our triumvirate of stakeholders, right? Which is corporate partners, influencers, and the cause-based organizations. Because if you can create these really great opportunities and synergistic opportunities, you're creating value across the board. You're no longer sort of asking for something and not providing something in return. Meaning that, influencers get asked all the time to do something for a nonprofit, and many influencers will do it, but it's really about how can we create sort of this win-win-win opportunity where we search for or identify influencers or key opinion leaders or ambassadors that are already talking about the cause or the mission that we're aligned with, right? That is like number one, because if they're not, it's inauthentic. And it doesn't work. If you work with an ambassador that, let's say, is a gaming ambassador, and all they were talking about is the new Call of Duty, and maybe they talk about some environmental stuff because it's important to them, but you're maybe a health and human services nonprofit, and you try to get them to do something, their audience is just not going to compute, because if it's not Call of Duty and environmental causes, there's a misalignment there. So it's really about how do we find influencers that are already aligned or talking about our mission. And then how can we incorporate potentially corporate partners so that maybe corporate partners can underwrite a campaign. We can bring some corporate opportunities to an influencer to also talk about the cause and really create sort of this sustainable opportunity. Maybe it's a tent pole or a flagship event where you're doing every year, or maybe it's an awareness day or an awareness month that you're creating. But it's these sustainable opportunities that you're not just asking some random influencer to talk about, but an aligned influencer also bringing in corporate partnerships to sort of create the sustainable, like repeatable opportunity.
So Nick, for you, I mean, you probably had some established relationships with many influencers. Say you're just, ABC nonprofit down the street. How have you seen people be successful in getting connected with influencers? Just DMs, have somebody on their team reach out to this person's agent? I mean, how do you even get started on it typically? Or is it something that you typically need to go through an agency like yourself?
Well, I mean, agencies exist to sort of reduce the friction and like make things more streamlined. So could you do it yourself? Like 100%. And I think if you have the team and the resources to do it, obviously, we bring our expertise that packages all of it. But if you have some resources that can identify and reach out, by all means do it. And once you've identified the potential partners that you want to work with, it's really about making sure, and we talk about this a lot in storytelling and kind of this sort of a broken record around storytelling, but it's really around how can you make sure you communicate the value of your mission to a potential aligned influencer. And then once you understand and how to do that, then it's sort of more traditional, like maybe you send them a DM, maybe find their email address. Sometimes there's a phone number. Sometimes there is an agent that you have to work through. Agents make it a little bit tougher because, they have certain sets of pricing parameters and those sorts of things. And so a lot of that stuff is difficult to navigate, which is what we really understand how to do. But you can absolutely do an outreach yourself, figure out how to create some sort of sustainable relationship where the visions and values are aligned. Make sure you communicate that and be really specific about expectations. And then from there, I think you can build a relationship that's built on mutual benefit and trust to work together in that regard.
Gotcha. And what about corporations? Would you say similar avenue that you need to go through, get with somebody connected with them, or know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody? Or I think every nonprofit that I talk to would love the idea of expanding. I work with a lot of organizations that have a lot of governmental funding, and for a variety of reasons, nonprofits always want to diversify. We sit on pins and needles waiting for the state budget to be cut or the federal budget cut, right? And people always want to expand that individual, major gift, or corporate donor base. But I think for many organizations that don't have a strong board to make those introductions, it's been challenging for them. And I think there's always an idea of how do we get corporate attention? And I'm curious how you all have been successful, or what you've seen maybe work or not work for nonprofits to make those connections.
Sure. I mean, a lot of it, what we've been working on since we started is really almost a mindset shift. Whereas I think before it's you're trying to get a corporate partner involved, almost like to the point where like you're begging, or maybe it's like, hey, we'll put your logo on a website, we'll put your logo on a newsletter or an email. And some of that stuff is still valuable. But for us, it's really about a mind shift set where nonprofits now, I don't think it's never been a better time to be a cause-based organization and a nonprofit organization for a lot of reasons. But particularly when it comes to corporate partnerships, they're seeking you out. They are now, required to become better corporate citizens in this world. Right. And so, the mindset shift that we're talking a lot about is that nonprofits actually need to be thinking more of themselves like a media company. Their IP is their mission and their unique opportunities that they've done before. And so they can think about themselves like a media company where they have a platform that people want to be on, that people want to be a part of, and can work sort of with a corporate partner in that mindset that the corporate partners kind of need them. And you can empower that corporate partner to be a better corporate citizen, but to be a better communicator, to connect on more and better levels, and ultimately create more impact. Coming at it that way is significantly different than just saying, hey, we're here, we know you like us, please give us $25K for a sponsorship, and we'll see what we can do. So it's definitely a mindset shift that we talk about.
I love that. I had an interesting conversation last weekend with some friends, that's in the nonprofit space, and they've noticed the trend of more and more businesses and individuals not wanting to be listed in the annual report by dollar amount contribution. And I thought that was interesting, that I think corporations want to be considered good community, supporters. But it's been a little bit of a shift in, the typical thing like logo, thank you for your $25,000 gift, because an organization that gets funded by a corporation, there has to your point, there's obviously some sort of connection, whether it's a relationship connection and more of the politics around that I've certainly seen in large corporate giving. But even just kind of that middle size or small businesses that maybe it's because of a personal connection, and it's not necessarily something that they're looking for their logo everywhere. Maybe there's something else that a nonprofit can be creative about. For example, around like mental health awareness, maybe it could be coming into their business. I often have a lot of work come in to do kind of mission moments with my all staff meetings, and just sharing things about like veteran causes and women and children causes, or whatever it might be, and what are the issues around that, and just being willing to come in and really kind of be a partner in furthering the kind of the awareness of the issue. And obviously those that are leading that business, that for-profit business, they're all for it, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't support your mission otherwise. I think there's some
Yeah.
really interesting ways other than kind of like the typical way I thought about it. And it's funny when I was talking to my friend about this, and I said, I can absolutely relate to that because we only work with nonprofit organizations. So I don't want it advertised to everyone under the sun. If I financially supported one organization and I've got 199 other clients, so why didn't you support me? Not to mention all of the other organizations that maybe are clients of mine, but we have some sort of relationship with. So I thought about that, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, fundraising is just one aspect of partnership, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at, particularly on the marketing standpoint, we think about this a lot and how we execute, but just generally, like philosophically, we sort of look at three buckets of partnerships. You have your awareness partnerships, you have your interest partnerships, and you have your action partnerships. Your awareness partnerships are the people who maybe have strong and large reach and can get in front of a lot of different people. They may not necessarily drive a donation or some type of financial impact, but man, they can get you in front of a lot of people, which means you're getting a lot more maybe traffic to your social media or your website, which ultimately may lead to people who are interested, right? Get a newsletter sign up, or maybe they'll sign up for a volunteer opportunity, right? So getting people interested is sort of that second bucket, and trying to figure out like how you can create these relationships that can be sustainable, right? And that can be longstanding people that you build in your community, and then ultimately can lead to that action bucket, people who actually will do things in partnership with your organization. So yeah, that's just one asset or one facet of partnerships.
Yeah. I'm going slightly off topic in terms of like, how do you do this, more of the logistics, but I'm curious to get your take on this. So I'm working with an organization right now that I serve on the board with, and the organization has an amazing mission. They've got the national recognition on the work that they're doing. And the model can certainly be replicated in other spaces. And what's really cool, they have a really, really ambitious, I guess you would say, kind of impact statement, if you will. And it's not really financially driven, although we obviously need finances to do it. But it's about reach. It's about connecting with people, and it's suicide prevention for school-based children, school-age children. And, we've had very traditional ways of reaching children, and that's been going into schools, and that's been really effective, but it's not a very easily scalable model, right? Because we have to like train the speakers, and we have to go out to the physical spaces. And part of that statement, that impact statement, had talked about meeting where our youth play, learn, and it's some other word I should know. I'm embarrassed. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But immediately I thought about like, where do young people spend some of their time? Social media, right?
Sure.
And it got me thinking how nonprofits can have an impact in, to your point, maybe not necessarily fundraising, but impact. And how much easier would fundraising be if you can tell people, hey, last year we had an impact of reaching 40,000 students in the St. Louis metro area where we're at. But if you were able to say, we had 5 million people watching our videos, downloading resources, made up of both school-age children, made up of both educators and administrators of schools, other community leaders. And we've gotten this kind of feedback on the reduced rate in suicide in young people. So for me, it just like dawned on me, why are we not leveraging social media? And then there's this idea of like, whoa, Tosha, like that sounds amazing, but how do we even manage that? And then of course I just get online and I start doing a little bit searches. I was like, this nonprofit has like 1.2 million followers and they've had 5 million views on their videos that they posted on social media. So I'm just curious, like, I know more and more nonprofits are getting into that space, but how do you see the world going if nonprofits choose to not just embrace that this is going to have to be part of their communication and marketing plan? Before it was like direct mailing, social media is like a byproduct that they have to do, but it's not really intentional. An annual report, and maybe have a website that, let's just be honest, if money permits, gets updated one a few years if we're lucky. Right. And then, of course, the gala, and then we have a video. I've been in the industry for over 15 years. So that's the plan. With Kaleidoscope, you guys have thought about what impact can it have and how important is this social media space or digital marketing space versus those organizations that have chosen to not just embrace this world that we're moving into. I find this thing fascinating, and I'm pushing for it, obviously. We just have to talk about the infrastructure, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I want to talk about how you measure that.
Yeah, no, it's timely that you even asked this. I mean, I'm literally in the middle of writing a book around our philosophy of how we put all this thing together. And sort of we look at three tenets, like the social aspect of it, the partnership aspect, and obviously of the human aspect. And so I'm editing the social part of it right now. Social, when I think of social, it's social media, but it's also like in real life social. And so depending on who your target audience is or who you want your target audience to be is sort of where we suggest to really think about how you begin executing across sort of these multiple touch points, right? And so let's just specifically talk about social media. In your case, use case that you outlined. I mean, today we're doing this right now, measuring all assets or all facets of campaigns and executing them. So there could be campaigns where we're just trying to drive followers to a nonprofit social media account, typically Instagram, because that's where a lot of information, resources, communication is all happening for them, right? So driving people there and measuring the efficacy of those pieces. Sometimes it's to drive people, to your point, to resources, and we're measuring, which influencers and which channels and all that sorts of pieces. So it's definitely something that we encourage. We're measuring the entire funnel and every single aspect of what we're doing there. And that has to be, again, sort of looking at the awareness, the interest, and the action buckets. I mean, that's really the future of how you leverage your own audience or build your own audience to really to create these social moments, right? And really create these opportunities to really storytell in all the various ways that actually leverage impact. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you could drive a ton of people to a website, but if nobody's really ultimately taking any sort of interest or action into it, then the impact is null. And so you have to really nurture all aspects of these various, touch points to make sure that it all culminates into what the impact that you want.
To me, it goes back to measurement. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to leaders of nonprofits that we've done accounting work for. I see the social media retainers where I know that it's a function of their development director or some position within the organization will do social media as a very part-time thing. And I remember having a conversation with the CEO that was paying a couple $1,000s a month for social media management. And I think I'd asked some question around like, what's the ROI on this? And maybe it's not financial, I'm okay with that, but it's somebody that owns a business and looks to have an online presence. So mostly awareness. People know that we exist, right? There's no shortage of people that need my services. It's just knowing that I exist. And the same for the nonprofits, whether it's the beneficiary of those programs or those that might support those programs. And she said to me, that's just not something we expect to, get any money from. It's not a fundraising opportunity. We just have to use social media because that's the world we live in. And I just felt like if you're going to do social media, you really need to strongly consider, and not just social media, I would say digital marketing as a whole. You should certainly have some KPIs to track the effectiveness of some of these things, and not just your social media, but also your website, right? How many people are coming to your website? How many of those are converting? And I know that sounds really overwhelming to most people, but it's such an important. For many of my clients, that's their like brick and mortar kind of shop, right? Many of my clients, they don't necessarily have an office anymore. Or even if they do have a brick and mortar office, maybe they have multiple locations, and to see like the volume of interest and traffic and which pages are people going to. So I want to hear a little bit more about what KPIs you define for your clients and maybe what you look to measure, because I think a lot of people don't realize that you should be holding your marketing person or your communications person or your social media agency accountable for some sort of KPIs to make sure that you do have a return on your investment. And again, that may not be financial. That might be awareness that we were talking about before, and increase followers or increase engagement.
Sure.
Tell me what some of these KPIs that you track for your clients.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that like once you start talking, and I'm sure you've seen this, once you start talking about analytics and measurement, people can get really almost scared, like paralysis,
that's with all number stuff. That's
right?
All number stuff, Nick.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that when we started this whole thing out, it was really about accessibility. And so depending on the level of resources and understanding, I think you can measure one or two things. And I think it's very simple. Or if you're like, have a big team and you have an agency working for you, then you should demand and expect much more depth in terms of what you analyze. But I think the basic stuff is like, are we growing our following on social media? That should be number one. Number two, are people coming to our website from social media? If they aren't, why aren't they? And if they are, why are they coming? Right.
Sure.
And then once they're on their website, like think about the levers of impact. I mean, is it signing a petition that's important to you? Is it getting somebody to sign up for a newsletter? Do you have something like that? Ultimately, is it somebody that you want to do? I mean, what are essentially like, are people engaging at all with your social media, and are people coming to your website and doing anything? Like those are the two things that you should know. Very simple. Is it happening? And how often is it happening? And that's where you start. And then from there, you can start to dig into much more specifics or details depending on how much you want to go. But really, it's like, it should be that simple. Are people finding us and actually creating interest from us? And if they are they coming to our website and staying there and doing things that we want them to do? Depending on the answers to those questions is really dependent on how you shift your strategy and how deep you should go from there. But I think those are the two questions you start with. And it can be scary for sure when you try to have to think about all of the technical pieces that you need in place and all the things, the reports you need to, but before you even go into that rabbit hole, just really ask yourself, are people coming to our social media accounts or account? I usually say to focus on one first, but accounts. And then from there, are they coming to our website? And depending on those answers, you can kind of figure out what the next pieces of your strategy should be.
I love that, keeping it simple, not related to marketing necessarily, but I try to drop this at any time I can. One of my favorite books is Traction. It's a business book, and it's all about just like coming up with very simple measurements for your business. And it could certainly be applied to nonprofits. And then having a system of accountability to go back to those measurements on a periodic basis. And Charity would suggest looking at it weekly. And one of the things that we do at the Charity CFO, we certainly look at social media engagement, but we keep it very, very high level, very simple, like you said. And then also website traffic. And then I just want to know, is it trending upward or downward? And if it starts trending downward, why? And then maybe you start building out those metrics over time that can help you easily suggest, oh, it's because of this or it's because of that. Maybe you didn't have as many social media postings on a particular week. Maybe you kind of took a hiatus, or maybe your website crashed or was down, or I don't know, whatever was happening. Maybe there was an update with algorithms or whatever it might be. But I was talking to a CEO a couple years ago. She's been a client of ours for a long time. And she said something that I thought was really interesting and very true. She said, Tosha, when people come to my website, I either want their money as a gift, or I want their contact information. Because even if they're not necessarily looking to support us financially, at least I can keep them informed about what's happening in the organization. Maybe they want to benefit from our services. Maybe they want to share our services with someone else that can. Maybe they'll financially contribute in some way. So I think those are really good metrics on seeing who's coming to your website and how many new contact names are you getting and how are you converting. That's like phase 2, I think, of digital marketing tracking.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really profound, and I'll confess that's something that I've been working on with my own business. I mean, you can run reports through Google Analytics to tell you, how many people are coming to your website. And I think one month we had like 7,000, and I thought I didn't really have any really great tools to capture people's information, whether it's through like downloads, resources, and that sort of thing. And the same could be applied for a nonprofit, whether it's just subscribe to a newsletter or download resources or make a donation, whatever. And I think in that particular month, I only added like 20 contacts. 7,000 people, individual people came to my website, and I had 20. Like, I need to do better, right? Imagine if you're a nonprofit and you got 7,000 people and you were able to convert half of those, how quickly that mailing list would just go through the roof, and how much easier it would be able to do the work that you're setting out to do. So
yeah, I mean, people get stuck on wanting that the money, right? I mean, if we could kind of take a step back and realize that, again, there's this awareness bucket, there's an interest bucket, and then there's an action bucket, and we need to sort of figure out how we sort of attack and talk to all three. And then ultimately, when you have people that are aligned and interested with your cause, then it's about the 3 T's: time, talent, and treasure. They may not be ready for treasure, but they definitely want to provide their time, and they may not have a talent that they can provide you. So it's really like, how do you fit those 3 T's into working with your community and scaling all that effectively?
Absolutely. And then once, you get those measurements, you can start making other plans with what you're going to do next. right? As I kind of mentioned, I started tracking these. I was like, oh my God, this is abysmal. How can I do better? And nonprofits I've seen be able to do that as well. And I would imagine, Nick, what are things that you have found that as you started tracking your clients have realized we need to do something differently? And I think it's one of the things that the way that a nonprofit talks about themselves versus what is relatable or well understood, or I just find that sometimes in the nonprofit world, we get very much into our words and we use lots of words and they don't necessarily mean a lot to the average person, and how a nonprofit might see themselves versus how the outside world interprets whatever it is they're trying to say. I would imagine you have some cases where that's the case, but what
Oh
are
yeah.
some of those lessons learned that they find after start tracking things?
Yeah, I mean, it's always eye-opening, I think, for our nonprofit partners, even once we start measuring very basic stuff, that like
Yeah.
the aha moments. I mean, my favorite one to this day was one of our very first campaigns when we were working with a nonprofit, longstanding, over 100-year nonprofit, very large one, that was sort of shifting to creating a digital experience for the first time that they ever done something like that, changing from an in-person gala to a digital experience like many nonprofits did during the early days of COVID in 2020. And sort of the initial assumption was that, well, we know who our members are, our email list is gold, and we'll send a bunch of like physical mailers out because that has always worked in the past.
Yeah.
And so without really making any sort of assumptions on the success of that, even though I knew that wasn't going to be necessarily that successful, I said, let's just start tracking everything. And really see, is it actually generating impact for the three things that we want, which I think was for them, it was signing up for the event, signing up for a newsletter, and actually like driving a donation. And so we did social media, we brought influencers in, we did physical mailers, we did email, and we just started tracking things really, really early on. And the returns were essentially mailers didn't work, nothing from email, but man, when we did social media posts and when we worked with influencers, it drove website traffic, it drove signups, and then we saw donations. And so that allowed us to very quickly shift from the mediums that we were using. And then once we dug into what actual platforms were working best, what types of messaging on those platforms work best, then we could just reduce cost, focus on our resources to those things, and ultimately drove like the cost ratio for the event ended up being like 9% of something
That's
silly
incredible.
because we just completely optimized cost, and then massively accelerated the output of what we allocated for that cost, and blew the goal out of the window. And so it doesn't necessarily take a lot to measure something very simple as here's a URL for this type of channel, there's a URL for